Okay, I'd like to talk a little today about making chili. Chili is one of my favorites, and I'm sure a lot of you enjoy chili out here. One thing about chili is there's really no wrong way to make it, unless of course you're opening a can and just pouring it in a pot and heating it up. One of the things I like about chili, or at least the chili I make, is I like that smoky flavor. I like to have a smoky flavor, and I like the toothiness to a chuck roast as opposed to ground beef. So, how are we going to proceed? We're going to cut these vegetables up and get them ready, and we're going to stick them on the grill along with the chuck roast. We're going to cook them whole as chuck roast with a little bit of, just a little bit of rub, and all this is cumin and chili powder and kosher salt. That's just going to help infuse a little bit of flavor. We're not going to cook the meat thoroughly through on the grill because there's no need to. We really want to do is just get to the point where the meat isn't absorbing any more of the smoke flavor. We'll take it in, we'll cut out all the excess fat, and we'll grind it up in a food processor and put it in the chili. And I'll show you that later. One thing I do want to show you with a technique that I learned about cutting onions, and I'll show you the rest of the technique, is to cut them in half, pole to pole, like this. And later on, when we go to put them in the chili, you'll see why. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off this end here on each of these. And the peppers, we're just going to, well, I'll tell you what. This red pepper's pretty big. Please note that I did wash these. You never know who picked them and what they were picking before they picked them, if you know what I mean. So I'm just going to cut these up, cut these in half. And take the cores out. I'm not too worried about getting them all totally cleaned up with respect to the ribbing and the core, because they're just going to go on the grill and half it's going to burn off. And we'll clean up the rest of them once we bring them in from the grill. As far as putting the rub on, I didn't make a lot of rub. Like I said, we're just going to put a little bit of rub on each one of them just to give them a little bit. Hey, check this out. Is that why they call it rub? Finally figured that out. Anyway, I'm going to rub this in. Turn it over, get a little bit of rub on the other side. And I'm just going to stick these pieces of meat on here, and it's going to be off heat for now because we're really just trying to smoke the meat. The vegetables, we really want them to get charred though, so we're going to stick the vegetables a lot closer to the fire, because later on a lot of you are going to say, wow, those are really burnt, but they're not, and they're going to add a lot of really good smoke flavor to the chili. And unfortunately, you're not going to be able to taste it, but okay. And then I'm going to stick some oak on here. And go with oak smoke. And that's it. Okay, we had the vegetables and also the meat on the grill smoking. I usually use hickory, but this time we used oak. Wanted to try oak. The goal wasn't to cook the meat all the way through because it's going to cook in the chili. What we wanted to do was cook the meat long enough so that it could absorb enough smoke flavor, because that was the whole intent of cooking the meat on the grill. You can see it looks pretty edible, and the vegetables look a little dark, but all that real dark, we'll call it bark on here, is going to add considerably to the flavor. So what we're going to do next is we're going to cut the meat up and put it in a food processor so that it's edible, or edible chunks, and go from there. I'm going to start cutting the meat up, and I'll just dig in, and you can see that that would look pretty good if we were just eating the meat plain, but we're not. So I'm going to cut it into some fairly manageable chunks. Some of the fat has rendered off, And this piece was pretty lean, so I'm not so worried about any of the leftover fat because, quite frankly, most people use hamburger meat, and there's a lot more added to it anyway. So we're just going to chop this up into manageable chunks and process it. And the last thing we want to do is over-process the meat. So I'm going to start with that amount in there. And pulse. And that's about the texture that you want, and you can see that it's not too finely, and then you get a little bit of chunks that you can eat, and that's going to give the chili very, very nice feel. Alright, we're getting the garlic all chopped up nice. A lot of folks will use a garlic press, and those work well. I just hate cleaning the thing, so I tend to chop it up, and I like bigger chunks of garlic. This looks like a lot of garlic, but the truth of the matter is we're making a lot of chili, and the garlic does add a nice flavor for it. I like my aromatics, garlic and onions. And I'm chopping it up on this cutting board because the garlic's going to pick up some of the flavor from the rub and the smoke off the grill. And I'm really into the smoke flavor. So, got the garlic chopped up. I'm going to stick it in the pile here. Now, as I told you before, I leave this end of the of the onion on because when I cut it like this, and then I'll cut it back again this way, and some of that difficulty is because this skin part, we'll get that off. Makes it easier to get it into little mouth size pieces. And that looks really burnt, but I'm going to tell you, all that stuff, it's going to add a nice patina to the chili, and it is unbelievably flavorful. So you can see here are the poblanos. Which is a mild chili. And then we have our jalapenos, which will add a little bit of heat, but we're also going to put, in addition to these couple of jalapenos, sorry about that, we'll put some hot sauce and some cayenne pepper. The oil has been heated. Now, in this process here, we're not trying to cook the vegetables because, quite frankly, they've already been cooked. So we're just going to stick them in here and let them come up to temperature just a little bit. So I'm going to stir them around. See, man, I wish you could smell what I'm smelling. It smells like smoked goodness. And then I'm going to stick the garlic in. And basically all we're going to do is have the garlic in there for about 30 seconds or so till it becomes aromatic. And then we're going to stick the meat in. The meat, as you can see, it's been processed, and what we've done is we've left larger chunks so that it has some bite to it. So it's not exactly like ground beef, but it's not big, huge chunks either. And we'll just get this garlic going a little bit more, and then we're going to start sticking some of the meat in. And then we're just going to go for it all. This is going to be a meaty chili. We don't need any fillers, i.e. beans. So we'll get that going. You can see it's a little bit dry. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick, you're probably looking at like 4 tablespoons of chili powder and maybe 3 tablespoons of cumin. And we can adjust that later. And the reason why I want to stick it in dry, because if you actually saute the cumin and the chili powder, it brings the flavor out. make sure that you check out part 2.